right, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to another exciting Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants broadcast with us here. I know for our classes, a lot of you are joining us for the very first time this year or ever, and so if you are new to us, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. This is our first full week back in business. We've got 18 broadcasts this week alone. Later today, we are going live with Jesse Cramian, Emma Cramp, and George Karuna, so we're going to talk about volcanoes, the poles, and deep sea scuba diving. It is going to be a thrilling kickoff to the school year. But to kick off today's festivities, we've got one of my very favorite speakers of all time, who I'll introduce after I highlight the fact that we've got a Kahoot quiz today. So if you're live with us, if you're joining on YouTube and you want to play along with a little 4-question quiz in about 25 minutes or so, you can type in that game pin below. Super easy, extra little bit of fun and interactivity in the broadcast. Now today I'm really excited because we are welcoming back the very first person I reached out to in the summer to bring back and make sure we had on to help kick off the year, and that is Dr. Hugh Griffiths. He is with the British Antarctic Survey, and so his role gets him to go to one of the coolest, literally and figuratively, places on this planet to understand more about Antarctic biology specifically, some of the amazing creatures on the deep sea, on land, and more. It is honestly one of my very favorite topics with some of the best imagery you will ever have here at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, so you're in for a real treat. Dr. Hugh, welcome back to the broadcast, and take us away, man. Nice to see you again.
Hi, Jesse. Thank you very much. Do I have to start sharing screen? No, perfect. Thank you. So I'm going to start with a picture of 2 Adelie penguins on a beach in Antarctica. And there are rules about how close we're allowed to get to the penguins, but nobody tells the penguins. So these 2 were coming at me pretty quickly to find out who I was and what I was, because there were just hardly any people in Antarctica. So the wildlife I'm going to show you, any pictures that are mine or videos that are mine, the animals really do get that close and aren't afraid of people. But first I'll start by just letting you all know where Antarctica is. And when you look at a map that you might see at school, the Antarctica is the white bit smeared across the bottom. And most of us couldn't draw a map of Antarctica if our lives depended on it. But actually, when you see it from space, Antarctica is a huge white continent surrounded by a paler white color that you can see in this image that is actually the ocean, where it's frozen at the surface, so sea ice as it's called. And Antarctica is the coldest, windiest, driest, highest, and least populated continent in the world. So it gets incredibly cold, almost minus 90 degrees centigrade. The wind speeds of over 200 miles per hour, but hardly any rain or snowfall over the whole continent. Even though there's ice on there, it's built up over millions of years. And it's a really high continent. So over 2.5 kilometers high is the average height of Antarctica. And only about 4,000 people live there in the summer and around 1,000 people over winter. So it's a huge amount of space where there's no people. But as I said, there's sea ice all around it. But the sea ice isn't there all the time. So this is it in Antarctic winter. And as it comes towards Antarctic spring, the ice starts to melt. And then in summer, it really shrinks back. So in the winter, Antarctica doubles in size with the sea ice. But as summer comes, you can see that it shrinks back further and further. And at the moment, we've got a record low in Antarctic sea ice. So it's the smallest amount of ice for this time of year that's ever been recorded. And so you can see that the ice melts away to almost nothing, but stays in a few places. Usually it's places I'm trying to get to and gets in the way of where I'm trying to work. And I'll give you a very short introduction to life on land because I really specialize in the ocean. But life on land is hardly anywhere, and there's hardly any of it because only 0.5% of the surface of Antarctica is free of snow and ice. And in some places, that ice is 4 kilometers, so over 1 mile thick. And the biggest plants you'll see in Antarctica are mosses, lichens, liverworts, and in some very, very special places, you get some grass. And that's it. That's the biggest plants. And so the biggest land animals you find in Antarctica are tiny, tiny animals. So there's springtails, mites, tardigrades, or sometimes called water bears. And the biggest land animal in Antarctica is a wingless insect, a wingless midge. And so on land, the biodiversity is very simple, but that contrasts massively with the ocean. Life in the sea is much more complicated and much more biodiversity. So this is a cross section, a cut through the whole ocean from the surface to the seafloor. And in Antarctica, there's an estimated 20,000 or more species. And of those, around 90 of them are the cute, cuddly, feathery or furry things that we know about, like penguins, seals, whales, albatrosses, those kind of things. And so that's only 90 out of 20,000. But that doesn't mean they're not there in huge numbers. And as you can see from these selection of pictures that came from one of my expeditions, where I didn't even have to leave the ship to get amazing shots of animals that came really close to where we were working. And penguins are the most common bird in Antarctica. There are literally millions and millions of penguins in Antarctica. But there are 18 different types of penguin in the world, but only 2 of these species make the Antarctic continent their true home. And that's the emperor penguin and the Adelie penguin. And I'm going to talk a little bit about both of those. The emperor penguin is the tallest living penguin. There are fossil penguins that are almost 2 meters tall, but this one's about 1.5 meters tall. So taller than many of the people in your class. And it's a very heavy and large bird. And if you look at it, you think, well, it's a big ball of fat that doesn't have much of a neck. But it might surprise you to know that this is what an emperor penguin looks like on the inside. It's about 1/3 of it is a neck. So it's got a very typical bird skeleton, but you can see it's got those very strong wings bones that have now become flippers for swimming with, and they do swim. And this is an Adelie penguin, the other species of penguin that makes its home in Antarctica. And they are my favorites. They're incredibly strong and incredibly brave, and they're not afraid of anything. Unless, of course, it's a massive ship coming towards where they're sitting. So these ones are jumping off their ice to swim away from our ship. And these Adelie penguins swim like tiny little torpedoes. They're amazing to watch in the ocean. And you'll see that one of them in a second is going to jump out on the wrong piece of ice. But don't worry, he did make it back to all his friends afterwards. So just now, about to pop up on the right-hand side. There he goes, completely in the wrong direction. Their eyesight isn't great out of the water, but in the water they can see really well. There are also 6 types of Antarctic seals, including the leopard seal, Ross seal, Weddell seal, crab-eater seal, fur seals, and elephant seals. Now, elephant seals are huge and can dive down to over 2 kilometers down in the ocean. And when I mean huge, they are a massive bag of fat. And that fat keeps them warm and helps them to be able to dive deep in the ocean. And this one here is enjoying sunbathing at one of our research stations. The leopard seal, on the other hand, is the only Antarctic seal that eats other seals. It also eats penguins, fish, and krill. And it's a very, very voracious predator. And this is one on the beach. And don't let that smile fool you. Those huge teeth make it a very, very big opponent to most other organisms apart from killer whales. Crab-eater seals are potentially the most numerous large mammals on Earth, between 7 and 75 million of them. And this is what they look like. But actually, they don't eat crabs. There are very, very few species of crabs in Antarctica. What the early explorers saw them with red bits in their mouths and imagined it was crabs that they were eating, but it was actually Antarctic krill, which I'll talk about later. And there are at least 15 species of whale that spend time in Antarctic waters, including the blue whale, which is the largest animal that's ever lived. But we also have minke whales, which are these beautiful smaller whales, about 10 meters long. And these were racing the ship when we were in Antarctica. So as you can see, the white in the background is actually that frozen ocean I was talking about. There's no land in this picture. But these whales followed us for almost a whole day, racing against the ship and using us as a way of getting to new bits of the ocean where we were breaking the ice, because they still need to come to the surface to breathe air. So even when they go under the ice, they have to find cracks to come up and breathe again. And around half of all the killer whales on Earth, something like 27,000 individuals, live around Antarctica. And they really are the top predator in the region. When I was there earlier this year, I saw them trying to kill a large adult humpback whale, which has not been recorded before by scientists. And this is a baby orca or killer whale swimming just off the jetty at our Rothera research station. So from all the things I've talked about now, from this top predator right down to that krill that I was talking about that the seals were eating, there's a food web, as we call it. So these arrows connect up who eats who. So at the bottom of the picture, there's phytoplankton, which is another word for microscopic plants that float around near the surface of the ocean. And they're eaten by krill, which are this really important organism, and I'll talk about them a bit more in a second. And then pretty much everything else either eats krill or eats something that eats krill. And at the very top there, you can see the leopard seal and the killer whale, or the orca. And that's the air-breathing part of Antarctica sorted. So that's all the things we've heard of, that 90 or so species. But actually, there's life in the plankton as well. And these are those microscopic plants I was telling you about. You can see the green. That's like the green of the leaves of the trees and things on land. And there are about 700 species in the plankton. And by far the most important in terms of the ecology of Antarctica is this creature called krill. And this is the Antarctic krill. And they're going to give you some absolutely crazy numbers on this animal. There are up to 800 trillion krill in the world at any one time. That's an 8 and 14 zeros. And they are the most abundant animal on the whole planet. And they reproduce every couple of years. Every couple of years, they live for 2 or 3 years. They're about the size of my finger, so they're not huge. And if you imagine that whales and things eat them, there have to be a lot of them, otherwise they would never survive. But they also play a really important part in feeding the rest of Antarctica. So these tiny plants that I just showed you live at the surface. And the krill eat this plankton. And they're quite messy eaters, but also their poop sinks down to the bottom of the ocean. And that's still full of a lot of nutrients and food. So unlike the little plants which are designed to float, the poop will sink straight down like little weights. And then, so they'll reach the animals at the bottom and provide food to a whole community of creatures at the bottom of the sea. And you might think, what lives down at the bottom of the sea in Antarctica? But there's actually around 19,000 species. So by far the biggest, 94% of all the species in Antarctica live at the bottom of the sea. And this picture here is made up of animals that I've collected on different expeditions to Antarctica. And you can see so many different colors and shapes and sizes of animals. There are sea cucumbers, giant starfish with 50 arms, giant sea spiders the size of dinner plates, all sorts of creatures, including corals and sponges that you wouldn't think lived in cold water, but they're actually there in huge numbers. And this is a little window onto the bottom of the sea from one of our vehicles that we send down without people in, that carries cameras and other equipment to monitor the bottom of the sea. And you can see sponges, you can see strange orange things that are called feather stars that are related to starfish, and loads of other life there. And you can see this huge yellow sponges in this picture. And some of these creatures are more than a meter across. And again, you even get fish. And this fish is a special type of fish which has actually got no red blood cells because there's so much oxygen in the water around Antarctica because it's so cold. But you do have antifreeze in their blood to stop them freezing up at -2 degrees centigrade. And there are some things that might surprise you that you find on the bottom of the sea in Antarctica. Now, this one's a bit shocking. This is actually another one of those Adelie penguins. And unfortunately, it's died at the surface, has sunk to the bottom. And just like that krill poop, nothing is wasted at the bottom of the sea. So here we have sea urchins, starfish, and fish eating the little penguin's body because any food that reaches the seafloor is eaten in Antarctica. And there are thousands of species. And I said we found a lot of species and we only estimated around 20,000 species. That's because we keep finding so many new species all the time. And in this case, here's 2 species, both of which are named after me. So there's Colosternura griffithsii. Griffithsii is a little Latin-sounding version of my surname, Griffiths. And the other one is Huii, which is after my first name, Hugh, and they were both found by our expeditions and named by some Australian scientists who work in a museum and are experts. So every time we find new animals that nobody's seen before, we have to take them to people in museums who are experts at identifying these creatures, and then they spend their time describing them. And sometimes we find so many new species that it takes almost 10 years for the whole of the list of animals that we found on one trip to be identified and given a name. And I'm going to show you a video now of what these animals look like at the bottom of the sea as we move around. And I might show it twice just so that you get to see it in detail. Yeah. There we go. So in this picture, you can see large starfish and feather stars and sponges. Here's a close-up on some corals. And there's a small crustacean living on what we call a sea squirt. And in the background is a worm. This fish lives inside a sponge and is waiting for krill to swim past. And because the lights are on, it can see them better and able to get a nice meal. But this is a few hundred meters down on the seafloor. And here's an octopus. And then one of those ice fish that I talked about before that has antifreeze for blood. And these sponges are really big. They're over 1 meter tall, probably even 2 meters tall, and they're covered in all sorts of life. You can think of these sponges as almost like an apartment block for life. And then those feather stars that I talked about earlier, they're very strange. And when they're disturbed, they swim like nothing else. And then we end up on a video of a sponge garden. And that is hundreds and hundreds of sponges as far as you can see. So I'll show that again because it's quite a lot to take in. So you can see that there are lots of animals on the seafloor. Not everywhere. There's some bits that are muddy. But where you have rocks and things, there's lots of things on the surface. And you can see all these different colors and shapes that you just don't get on the surface. And you can see corals around the edges of this and some tube worms. And that fish has probably never seen light like this before. They normally see bioluminescence, which is the light given off by the krill. And as you can see, the octopus and another large predator. So there's a lot of big animals as well as the smaller things down there. And again, back to these huge sponges. They're home to thousands of other animals. Lots of animals live in them, on them, or lay their eggs in them. And it's a huge community. And these swimming crinoids, this is what the ocean looked like at the time of the dinosaurs, really. These were the animals that were dominating then. And we finish again on huge sponges and sea anemones. And some of those sponges are about the size of me. And so at that point, because I know we got lots of questions probably and a Kahoot to do, I'm going to hand over back to Jesse and say thank you very much for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm still thinking about the penguin that went off to the right. That was a glorious section of video, always is. So thank you very much for including that. As you mentioned, we are going to do a little Kahoot together. 4 quick questions. You don't win anything, but you do win Hugh and I's everlasting respect if you succeed at this. So the faster you answer, the more points you get. And worth noting, we have like 30 of these permanently on our Kahoot page. So if teachers want to check that out, I'll make sure you get that in a link when we're done this broadcast. But we'll do this quickly together, and then we're going to go to Miss Foster's class first, and we do Q&A. YouTubers, I know we got Miss Withrow's class in Missouri today. All our live groups, I'm coming to you one by one for questions. We should get through a couple rounds. I'm going to kick this off and get started. About 20 seconds per question, especially if you're on YouTube. The faster you answer, you'll be able to see everything pop up. Some classes have been having a little trouble with that. So let's get underway and dive in. By the way, very cool that you have species named after you. I know I've mentioned this before, but not many people in the world have species named after them. That's a neat trick.
I know. I've possibly got the ugliest ones, but they're still mine, so I love them.
They're still yours. Who cares? All right. Penguins and polar bears can meet in Antarctica. True or false? I basically have this question in every polar program of all time now, because if my contribution in education is going to be one thing, it's going to be about this question. I'm going to aim small. Let's see. Our classes. No, so it is false. Most of you thought true. Polar bears are in the north. They are not in the south. Penguins and polar bears never meet. Totally different sides of the world. Arctic literally means bear. Antarctic, no bears. That's the easy way of thinking about it. Cool. Okay, so our leaderboard is going to be all screwed up with this. This is exciting. Bronze Swan in our lead. Not a real name. It's a pseudonym, needless to say. All right, Antarctica isn't owned by anyone. It is entirely used for science. How many people live, work there? This was explicitly mentioned during the broadcast. Who was paying attention? We're going to find out together. 10 to 20, a few hundred, a few thousand, or 100,000. A lot of people in Antarctica. You've been there in both seasons, yes?
No, I luckily get out at the end of the summer. So the latest I've been there has been kind of autumn time when the ice is coming back. Because after that, it's only like you 6 months of being stuck there, basically.
Yeah,
so I get out before it's too late.
Most of our audience got this right. A few thousand, 1,000 in the winter, 4,000 or so in the summer. And again, the winter is months of perpetual darkness in one of the coldest, most remote regions of the planet. So good for you getting out. Change in leaderboard. We're going to head to question number 3. You guys are doing well. Thank you for participating. True or false again? Antarctica grows. True or false? This is also explicitly mentioned. And this is just, I like adding this because I really want to drive this point home. It's such a cool fact to think about. And the scale of it is so tremendous. It's really interesting seeing a picture of just the actual landmass in Antarctica because you never actually get that. That never happens where it's just the land itself. A lot of people didn't answer in this one, gun shy. But yes, it is true. Antarctica grows massively. Double the size, you said?
Yeah, in winter. Although this winter is the first winter that we're way below what it should be.
Yeah, which is disconcerting.
It's quite scary. It's big numbers different to what it should be. But
is.
let's stay with yes, it's still growing.
Yes. Majestic Goose keeps our lead with our final question, and then we're going to Q&A. What on earth is this thing? Here's a picture. It is, honestly, avant-garde clock face, the thing from Alien that jumps in your face, Antarctic sea spider, or I don't want to know. And that's a perfectly valid answer if you just want to run away screaming. They are such spectacular creatures. I love them.
They're pretty much my favorite thing when we catch them. They're just so cool. Not that I'm giving any hints there.
No, not at all. You did not catching clock faces. Good. Most of you got that right, but I do want you to keep home the idea that there are giant sea spider type creatures in Antarctic waters because it is fantastic. As this is coming up with our leaderboard, by the way, I will do a plug for Frozen Planet 2, the best documentary series in years. If you want to explore more amazing stuff in Antarctica and the Arctic, just as a plug when you're done. Majestic Goose wins our Kahoot. If you are any of these people, let us know who you are. We'd love to say hi. And I'm going to head to Tuscaloosa, Alabama to Miss Foster's class. Welcome in, folks. And if you want to dive into the question, you are good to go. Hugh, you can also exit screen share if you'd like. If you can't see us, make sure you can. But hey, Miss Foster, welcome in.
Say hi. All right, Harper, ask your question.
What is the coolest animal that you've seen in Antarctica?
No pressure.
Oh, that is the toughest question. People ask me that, and it probably varies from day to day. Like when we're on the ship going down there and we see killer whales or humpback whales, any of these things, everybody gets super excited. But then you see a penguin on the beach and they are so cute and so funny that you think they're the coolest. But actually, because I'm a hardcore scientist that I'm supposed to only care about my work, I would say things like the sea spiders really are exciting because you don't get to see them anywhere else in the world on this scale. And when you get to hold one in your hand, something you've only learnt about in school or in studying at university, then it really is exciting to see something that you've only read about that is very difficult to believe it's a real animal and you've got it there in front of you. So I would say the sea spiders are pretty cool.
Very, very cool. We're going to head to some of our younger classes first because I know high schoolers sometimes take a little time to work up the courage to ask questions. So I'm going to go to YouTube. Miss Withrow's class wants to know, they're joining us in Missouri today, and welcome in, folks. What's the creature that's like a cross between a jellyfish sea star in the video that's swimming at the bottom? So I don't know when you put this in. 1218 you put this in. Could be a feather star. Like, do you know what you're talking about? You can go back.
Yes. Yeah. So those are the weird things that were swimming because they got scared by the ROV or the vehicle we'd sent down. And they are amazing because they date back millions and millions of years in terms of their history. So if you look in the fossil record, there was a time when the bottom of the ocean was covered in these things. And in Antarctica now today, because we're missing some of the big predators like sharks and most type of crabs because it's too cold for them, then these really ancient forms of life get to dominate again. And feather stars are a crazy combination of these feathery arms. They look like big feathers that have been spread out around a crown shape. And they sit at the bottom of the ocean, filter feeding. So using those arms to collect food. But if you scare them, they can use them to swim. And they're really, really strange creatures. And if you upset them too much, they drop some of their arms to escape as well. So they're really weird creatures, but they can regenerate their arms if they drop them and things. But they are so weird, and they are amazing. But there are also some that are called sea lilies, which are the same thing but on a stalk. And you think that they're rooted to the floor because they've got like attached like a plant is, but actually they can crawl along as well. All of these things can move, even though they look like they should be a plant or something like that.
I'm so glad someone brought up something about them, because they're my favorite creature in Antarctic waters. Like feather stars just always mesmerize me. I could watch them for days, and I did not know that they dropped arms. That is very, very cool. High schoolers, I'm coming to you in 2 quick seconds. Miss Arnone's class, I'm heading to you guys first. If you want to unmute your mic, you're good to go. And then Miss Adhill, I'm coming to you right after Miss Ball, Mr. Kim last. Hey, grade 4s. Hi.
Ask a question. Is climate change affecting Antarctica?
Great question.
That is a really good question. And unfortunately, yes, it really is. And it's impacting it faster than we thought it would. So some of the changes we've seen in the last couple of years, we were predicted to happen maybe in 20 or 30 years' time. So things like the sea ice that I talked about this year, over winter, you know, the video showed the sea ice disappearing. Over winter, that sea ice is supposed to grow back. But we're somewhere a few percent, maybe almost 10% less sea ice than we should have in some places. So that doesn't seem like a lot, but there's a lot of creatures like the krill that need the sea ice to be there for them to get their winter food and things like that. So climate change is happening there. We're also seeing glaciers melting on the land. So the ice is retreating away from the edge of the ocean, which means we're getting a lot more fresh water and things going in. And without the sea ice as well, icebergs get frozen in place by the sea ice, so they do less damage to the seafloor, scraping it and things in the winter. But this winter, icebergs have been able to move around a lot more still because there's been less sea ice. So if you imagine some of those animals I showed you can't run away very quickly. So if there's a big chunk of ice scraping up the bottom of the floor, they're probably going to get squashed by it. Whereas other things like the fish can swim away. So some animals are more affected by climate change than others.
What an interesting take, and very specific to those creatures that we were showing today. I've never heard that before, so thank you for that, Hugh. Miss Adhill's class, I'm heading to you guys, UDCI. Come on in. Hey.
Okay, ask your question.
Are we
David.
unmuted?
I think so.
How do different kinds of animals keep warm, especially in the cold days?
Great question.
That's a really good question, because some animals, like the things at the bottom of the sea, don't want to keep warm. They actually like being -2 degrees centigrade. And if you warm them up a few degrees, they keel over and die. So that's another problem with climate change. If we warm the water too much, some of these animals won't be able to survive. But other animals like the penguins, the seals, the whales, etc., they all have lots of different strategies to keep warm. But the main one they have is being fat. So blubber. So you see it on the seals, the penguins, and the whales. They're all big, fat animals, and that fat keeps them nice and warm. And a lot of them are hairy or furry as well. And the same with the penguin feathers. They trap a lot of air in the feathers and keep them warm and insulate them. And there's also a clever trick they all do with the bits of their bodies that stick out. So if you imagine that our arms and legs probably get cold, your feet and your hands get cold quicker when the weather's cold. So we put on gloves. But if you're swimming in the ocean, your hands are going to get cold whatever you do. So things like whales and seals and penguins have the blood vessels in their arms or their flippers where you've got warm blood flowing out of the body and cold blood flowing back in. They put those blood vessels really close together. So instead of the heat escaping into the ocean, they use the heat of the blood going out to warm the blood coming back, so they never lose that heat. So they've got cold blood in the ends of their flippers and their feet, but they keep the heat inside the body. So penguins have usually always got cold feet, so they don't feel it as cold. But that's a really clever way of designing your body if you live in a cold place, to just recycle the heat.
Very neat. And by the way, interesting, we got that specific question. Literally yesterday, we were talking with OceanWise about adaptations for keeping warm in the water. So if you want to check out the YouTube video, there's a lot more detail on some of the other adaptations, but I like that very much. And thank you to a high schooler for asking your question. Way to go. Ms. Ball's class, we're going to head to you guys, GDCI as well. And then Mr. Kim, we're coming to you for yours. Hey, grade 11s.
So our question was, do you recommend to kids this age going into your field, and how would they go into your field?
That's a very good question. It's also quite a tough question because I'm a bit obsessed and always have been with the ocean, but I never wanted to work in Antarctica. I have to be honest. When somebody asked me at the end of my studies, do you want to apply for these jobs at the British Antarctic Survey? I said, no, why would anybody want to go there? It's cold. It's dark for 6 months of the year. It's the end of the world. Why would anybody want to go there? Because I didn't know enough about it. So I think if some of what I've said has got you interested, that it might be the job for you. And to do it, you really do have to go on to university and do probably a PhD, which is about the highest qualification you can do in studying in a normal university. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of commitment. And I would say you could do the same amount of work and get paid a lot better in some other jobs, but I get to do the most amazing things. And I think I've probably got the best job in the world. But that's for me. So if it doesn't get you excited, it's a lot of work and not the highest pay. But if it does get you excited, then you get to do the most amazing things.
That's a great answer. And I will note too, I mean, Dr. Hughes at the highest level of everything in the work that he does, we have had people on this broadcast that are engineers and technicians and cooks in Antarctica, Zodiac guides that help guide people to and from the shore. So I mean,
completely, yeah. There's more of them than me. I couldn't stay alive in Antarctica without all of those people, and we couldn't do the science there without the people who run the ships and run the small boats. And so you can go to Antarctica and you can do other jobs apart from mine without having to spend all your money and all your time studying. But if you want to do the science like I do it, then you have to do the...
If you want Australians to name ugly species after you, you probably need to have a job like you. Just keep that in mind. Great question, guys. Mr. Kim's class, if you want to unmute your mic, you shared this in the chat, but let's share it in person because it's better that way. And then we're going to do a whole other round with our questions. YouTubers, you can share there as well. Hey, guys.
Hello. I was just wondering, do y'all work with like Navy or like military in any way?
Yeah, that's a good question. So some nations like Argentina and other countries like Chile, they will use military ships for their science sometimes, or to at least get people to research stations and things. We have non-military ships, what are called sort of civilian vessels. And they do most of our science. But occasionally a UK military ship will bring supplies to our stations. And because there aren't that many ships that can cope with the really bad icy conditions that we have to face in Antarctica, then a lot of countries do have to use military ones. I know that the US programs have military staff at some of their research stations that help to run the research station. But technically in Antarctica, you're not allowed to use weapons. It's a a continent that's dedicated to peace and science, which means we've had to kind of demilitarize it in that way. But there are military personnel who will help enable the science.
Interesting. And your most recent trip, by the way, too, you got the chance to go on the RRS David Attenborough, did you not?
Yes, that was the last trip I did was on that. I spent 3 months on that in February through to the end of March kind of time. And it was a really nice experience. It's much more comfortable than our last ship and much bigger, like 50 meters longer than our last ship. So it's huge, but you do have to walk thousands of steps a day just getting around for one bit that you have to work into. And it's about the fittest I've been on a ship because normally you get no exercise. And now it's just like this massive ship.
Very, very cool. I encourage our classes to check that out. We do a lot of programs with research vessels out in the ocean. So if you want to catch more stuff at sea, again, head to our YouTube channel and check out some more. We have enough time for a second round of questions because you guys are super fast. Hugh, thank you for leaving so much time for this. Miss Foster's class, I'm going to head back to you to start, and then Miss Withrow on YouTube, I'll come to you right after. Hey.
Hi. What inspired you to be a marine biologist?
Ooh.
This is going to sound really geeky, but I grew up next to the ocean in West Wales. So Wales is part of the UK, and my mum's house is right next to the beach. And so I'd go down the beach every day and I'd play in the rock pools or tide pools, as you might call them. And I never really thought I wanted to do anything else, but I didn't know it was a job. And now my job is literally the same thing, but just on a much bigger scale. And sometimes I still go down the beach and work. So I've been working in the Arctic a lot in the northern summers. I've been doing some work in Iceland, Greenland, and Arctic Canada in Cambridge Bay. And that I was doing much smaller scale work. So again, just on a beach playing in rock pools again. So I think maybe I was just lazy and didn't think of anything beyond what I liked doing, but I really enjoyed playing on the beach. So that became, if you watch the Barbie movie where Ken says, my job is just beach. Yeah. Well, sometimes my job is just beach. So that's my life.
If anyone gets a chance to go to a rock or tide pool and just play around and look for things, it is one of the most magical things you can do on a shoreline anywhere in the world that you are. They're just so enticing to look at that and be like, especially those little creatures. I've seen octopus and things. I've seen sea urchins in rock pools. I've seen all sorts of amazing creatures. So check that out if you're on a coast sometime in the not too distant future, folks. Great question, guys. Miss Withrow's class, what do all you scientists eat while you're working there? Gourmet? Is it penguin meat? What's going on?
So my colleagues who live in tents and like the geologists and things who work on land, they eat freeze-dried, like almost like astronaut food or sort of freeze-dried noodles and those kind of things. And then they melt snow and it's all very hard and it's like minus 20 degrees and all these horrible things happen to them. I do not eat like that. On the ship, I think on the ship last time for at least a month and a half, we had salad available. We only started repeating meals after at least a month at sea. I'm a vegetarian, and there was a whole vegetarian and vegan section to the canteen on the ship where we could go and eat whatever we wanted from there. And they would serve us hot food for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's very easy to put on weight on an Antarctic research ship because they do like to feed you really well. Whereas if you're living in those tents and burning thousands of calories keeping warm, then you have to eat chocolate bars and things like that just to get like huge chocolate bars every day just to keep the calories up to stop you losing weight. But on the ship, they keep us warm and well fed. So yeah, if you want lots of free food, Antarctica is a great place to go.
What a fantastic answer. We've had a lot of tent people, and I've had freeze-dried food myself. If you can avoid freeze-dried food in life, you will be happy. It's not the best. Sometimes it's passable, but that's when they just drown it in sauce. That's really the only way that is halfway decent. Ms. Arnone's class, I'm heading to you, and then we're going to go to our high schoolers to wrap up. Come on back in.
How does Antarctica grow while climate change?
How is it growing while climate change happens? Yeah.
That's a good question. So Antarctica still gets very cold in the winter. So Antarctica can get, like I said, to almost minus 90 degrees centigrade. And by the coast, it's a bit warmer, but still minus 20 or minus 40 degrees centigrade. So it only has to get below minus 2 for the sea ice to start to grow. But if you want lots and lots of sea ice growing, you need it to be very cold with some very strong cold winds. But so even if Antarctica is 10 degrees warmer in a heat wave, it's still going to be minus 50 or minus 60 degrees in some places. So it still grows. It's just not as much as it would if it wasn't experiencing these heat waves and weather changes that we're seeing at the moment.
Great nuance. Thanks for that, Hugh. Ms. Adhill's class, we're heading back to you. I'm hoping all the students have cool glasses. That's my goal. Yes, they do. Yes.
No, it's the same one.
Hi, ladies.
Wait, am I unmuted?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Have you ever had an encounter of a predator and prey interaction?
Ooh.
Cool.
Yes, so this one is a little, close your ears if you don't like scary things, but actually for me it was really strange. I've seen a lot of sort of invertebrates, so small creatures trying to eat each other and things when we catch them on the ship, and that's not so emotionally impacting. But when we saw, I think it was about 30 orca killer whales taking it in turns to attack this huge humpback whale, that was a pretty strange experience for us because we're not allowed to interfere with nature when we're down there. We're not allowed to try and scare the orca off or anything. But to see a huge, fully grown whale sort of being rolled on its back, so they were trying to drown it and things, that was quite a scary experience for us in terms of seeing it, and very emotional. And when you heard the whale making a lot of noises and things, and it was obviously in distress, and I don't want to go into too much detail because you're only in school and you don't need to hear the full horrors of what it was like, but actually when you see these predators in that environment, you realize how amazingly clever and strong orca are and why they are the top predator in the ocean. But you also have to respect that that's how they get their food. And we may not like to watch that, but it's like watching a wildlife documentary and realizing that you can't save every baby seal because every baby orca would starve to death then. So it's as sad as some of these things are, you have to remind yourself this is what life is like in Antarctica. It's not like sitting in a garden picking an apple or something. These things have to work for their food, and it's a really tough environment. So if they can survive there, it's because they can do things like that. So it's hard to watch, but it's a good reminder for us that we couldn't survive there without our big ship and our heating and our food and all the stuff I've talked about. I would last less than 5 minutes in the water, and I would probably last an hour on land if I was just dumped there the way I'm dressed now. And so it shows that these creatures, the fact they can do anything, let alone hunt other creatures down there, is amazing. So a lot of respect. And also, I'm quite glad I don't live anywhere that those things would be chasing me.
If classes are interested in following up, I will encourage you. Again, Frozen Planet 2 has an orca hunt footage. It's one of the most unique types of orca hunt in the world. It's not a big whale in that scenario. It's seals, including leopard seals, which is really unusual, but some of the best footage ever captured.
And I was the scientific advisor on that series as well. So my name's in the credits on the Antarctic episode, which is my favorite thing ever. To be named on a David Attenborough program was just the coolest thing.
I would say so. I just want to be like an extra in some film at some point to get my name in a credit, but Attenborough's the top tier, so kudos to you. 2 more questions to wrap up, folks. This has been spectacular, Miss Ball and then Mr. Kim. We got the same student coming back in a minute, but GDCI, hey guys.
All right, what kind of salaries do people make in Antarctica?
What kind of what?
What kind of salaries do people make in Antarctica?
The salads. By the way, you have the best voice ever. You should host radio like at all times.
Was that salaries or salads?
Salads. Salad. Let me go back. Sorry, I heard salads.
Salaries.
Salaries?
Yeah.
Well, it depends where you live and what country and what taxes they make you pay. I will say that it's similar to university salaries. So it's definitely better than minimum wage. But then when you add in how many hours you actually do compared to what you're contracted to do, it might not be better than minimum wage. But in reality, I have a decent life, but that's helped by the fact that I choose not to have a car and things like that. So, but actually research scientists are not the best paid people in the world. You will see a lot of, if you go onto social media and follow any research scientists, pay will always be a thing. And that's why I'm saying you've got to be passionate about this. You don't get into science hoping to become a millionaire. That's not going to happen. But actually, we can't complain. Compared to a lot of other jobs like, say, nurses and teachers and things, we may get paid more than some of them. So don't think of it as the worst paid job in the world, but it's definitely something you do because you love it, not because you want to get rich.
Yeah, great question, man. It's so funny. Whenever we hit grade 10, instantly, it's like students start asking about money, whether it's the whole expedition or salaries. It only happens in grade 10. It's unique. It's fascinating. It's like, what's after high school? Mr. Kim's class, we're going to wrap up with you guys. Again, if anyone wants to check out this program later, it will be on our YouTube channel. Everything we've done with you is there. There's a full, bigger Kahoot with you on our Kahoot page if you want to check that out as well. And if you want to see more Antarctic broadcasts, just check out our website. Lots on the go in the months to come. But we'll wrap up with one more question first. Unmute your mic, and you're good to go, guys. Hey.
How does political and like military policies affect like your research and how you can get it?
Interesting.
That's a really good question, because actually there is a whole bunch of different regulations that impact Antarctica. So in terms of most Antarctic things are covered by what's called the Antarctic Treaty, which is over 50 years old now, and it's the thing I talked about Antarctica being especially preserved for peace and science, that comes through the Antarctic Treaty, where a whole bunch of nations around the world and more each year sign up to the Antarctic Treaty, and it's reviewed every so often. And the same thing happens with, if you want to fish or collect animals from the ocean and things, you have to get permits, for example, to go down there and to do any work. So you can't just randomly go to Antarctica and do whatever you want. And somebody in an office somewhere has to sign off that work and say that you've done the best you can not to damage Antarctica too much by doing your science. And so there are loads of rules as well. So we can't just randomly take animals down there. There's no non-native species allowed to be introduced to Antarctica. We have to have really good explanations of why we're going there and what we're going to collect. And even people doing fishing and things like that down there are really well regulated. So illegal fishing gets heavily punished if it's found in the Southern Ocean, probably more than anywhere else in the world. It's a very well regulated fishery. And you can't do things like dump waste down there. We can't exchange water from our ship's tanks anywhere within the coastline and things like that. So there's huge amounts of regulations about what we can and can't do down there, which seems a bit of a pain when you're planning an expedition. But when you get down there, you realize why. because it's such a special place, so unique, so vulnerable. Those animals have no idea what we are, and they're not scared of us. So if we wanted to go around killing them all, it would be very easy because they just walk straight up to you or swim straight up to you. And so in the 80s, we had a lot of overfishing. And before that, we had whaling, which killed off loads of the whales. And so what we're doing now is regulations keep us from doing anything stupid or damaging Antarctica.
These are some really thoughtful questions, guys. A huge thank you to our audience, everything from grade 2 all the way through grade 11 today. Really appreciate you being here. If you want to check out more of the work that the British Antarctic Survey does, they've got a pretty easy URL below. I'll make sure all our registered classes have a link to this program and more info to keep the learning going. But Dr. Griffiths, may other species be named after you. Thank you so much for joining us for your annual broadcast du jour. And keep up the amazing work, man. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you very much. And thanks for the amazing questions. It was great.
It was great. We're going to bring in all our classes and say a big thank you and farewell. You guys, and we'll see you soon. Keep up the neat work. And yeah.